From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Our featured theme during the first half hour today, nutritional management of spring-calving beef cows and heifers, which will contribute greatly to calving success. K-State's Dale Blasi will talk about adjusting the cow and heifer ration to the persistently cold and wet weather conditions and about assuring that those females maintain adequate body condition score throughout the critical weeks ahead. Then K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek on economically comparing feedstuffs for the spring-calving cow herd and about monitoring feed and vitamin intake of the herd. He advises you producers to regularly consult the cows, as he puts it, on their nutritional needs. Later on, with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. Here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. As always, we appreciate you being along with us. Mike Side first today is a beef cattle nutritionist with K-State Research and Extension, Dale Blasi. As we have input today for you beef cow-calf managers with spring calving herds, which are definitely entering a telltale phase right now, amidst some early winter weather conditions. Dale, this has your attention in as far as making sure those cows are going to be up to the proper plane of condition and nutrition come calving time, right?
Absolutely, Eric. Compared to the last 2 or 3 years where it's been relatively cold with little to no moisture, we're seeing much more precipitation this year. And I think the implications of that, while it's good for our long-term crop production and so forth, I think we need to be cognizant of the potential implications on our calving conditions and so forth in the next 3 months or so.
And why it's so imperative now, you note that for most spring calving herds, the females are entering that third trimester, and that's where it all really heads down the home stretch.
Absolutely. The growth and the conceptus and everything that goes along with the pregnancy, the energy needs, the protein requirements for that mama cow to produce good quality colostrum and to provide a good fresh start for that baby calf. This is really where the determination is being made for the final countdown, as you indicated.
So what's happening out there? Recent days and weeks we've had persistently cold temperatures, colder than normal for mid-November on into early December, accompanied by damp conditions. That's a bad combination.
Absolutely, it is. And, you go to the literature and look at the lower critical temperature for at least for a fall coat is estimated to be around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And estimated energy needs for a cow below that is about 1% energy for every 1 degree below that lower critical temperature. And factor in added weather on top of that, and we're looking at an increase by somewhat of 40%. We just essentially lose the insulatory capabilities of that hide. And we're just basically heating the environment like in a house with all the windows opened up. So we need to be cognizant of the body condition that the cows have now and basically try to do level best to hang on to at least a body condition 5 for mature cows, and if not, a body condition 6 for some of these younger aged females, certainly.
So that energy adjustment in the ration, where does one begin amping that up?
Evaluate what you presently have on hand. And myself and my colleagues in the beef team and all the district and county extension agents, we talk forage analysis ad nauseum. And it's good to know what you have to ensure that you are fully accounting for the cow's protein and certainly the energy needs. And for those guys that are out on crop residues right now, what may have worked very well the last 2 or 3 years. Again, because of the wet conditions, we have an increased acceleration in the decline in quality with the trampling and the moisture and the breakdown and what is truly available for that beef cow to selectively consume. I think we just need to be aware of that and don't wake up one morning and go out there and see cows that are in subpar body condition.
What sorts of energy sources are preferred here as provided supplementally?
Well, it's important looking at whether you're running on dead grass or if perhaps you are providing prairie hay or something along on a crop residue to know really where you're at. Protein sources is available to a lot of different folks. There might be some opportunities for some soybeans. There were some damaged soybeans, I think, fed in limited quantities, perhaps not more than 2 pounds or so, a good opportunity to provide some needed protein along with some of the added fat that might not impair the digestibility in the rumen from the high fat. But I think we need to provide energy to those cows, and by providing energy, ensuring that they're getting a proper amount of protein to help those microbial organisms in the rumen break down the roughage to provide added energy intake through that consumption.
So soybeans could serve that purpose? Distillers' grains,
I think
perhaps?
limited quantities of soybeans, if they're on hand, I'd say not more than 2 or 3 pounds tops. Distillers' grains is always a good opportunity. Providing any grain in a late pregnancy cow, not providing, say, more than 0.5% of her weight. So, let's just say a 1,000-pound cow, on example, we're talking no more than, say, tops 5 pounds. But what's important with providing grain is to ensure your crude protein levels don't get below, say, 20%. So you're going to have to blend in something as well. And basically then what we're talking about is a 20% cube, if you will. And fully account for the mature size of what cow you're running out there. I mean, we always talk about 1,200-pound cows, but we see a lot of 1,600-pound cows out there today. So make sure you're not just shortcutting and providing the true amount that cow requires to maintain her flesh.
And those commercial protein sources that you can buy retail, why, those will suit the need as well if these others aren't available.
That's right. I mean, there's a full shopping list, if you will, of what could be provided, but just assure that you take into account the protein level in the base forage being consumed, and then just round out the missing edges with whatever you can provide to meet her needs, and to fully account for the weather, the wet weather, those conditions that really do place an untold demand on that gestating beef cow.
We keep talking about the protein/energy supplementation here, but you hinted at this. One needs to have a firm idea of what they have in that forage, because we had some questions about that coming out of this drought-stressed year.
That's right. And in some cases, one thing about drought is it does limit the development of a lot of lignin and the fiber. The plant growth is held back, and as a consequence, if you go back to the literature, it'll tell you that quality tends to be a little bit greater. But again, it makes quite a difference if you have a base forage that you're providing feed that's 6 versus 8% protein. You look at that and provide, again, on a 1,000-pound cow at 2% intake, using a rough number here on this interview, you're talking 1.6 versus 1.8 pounds. That equals 1 pound of a 20% that you're bringing in. You're looking at 30 or 40 cents. And, the other side of the coin is you don't want to over-provide as well. But candidly, a producer needs to truly evaluate the existing body condition of their cows. And if possible, and I recognize that complicating and separating cows out by parity or by age or body condition equals extra work and extra tanks of water to break ice every morning, but to do a better job of providing the nutrients that those cow classes require, the age as well as the body condition, that really is a more effective means, is to separate out by your first calf versus your mature cows and take care of them accordingly.
And sort by body condition score of your mature animals.
And many times, yes, even in there, but then you might want to look at the teeth and the age of the cows. There might be some elderly cows in there, and they do need some extra help, no question about it.
And to complement all of this, Dale, you want to provide protection of those animals from the elements. Whatever shelter one can provide to keep them as dry as possible, that pays dividends.
Especially keeping them out of the wind. And that really is a concern of mine for those folks running on crop residues right now. In many cases, there's just not an opportunity for those cows to get out of that wind. And trying to stop or minimize the impact of the wind chill on those animals.
And one further thing, water intake, how critical is it to maintaining that body condition?
It's very important. Water intake is correlated with dry matter intake, and again, that cow needs a set amount of energy and protein, and if the energy and protein intake is impaired in any way, again, because of potential less water to be consumed, that's hurting her system because that baby's continuing to grow, and she's mobilizing a lot of her fat reserves and so forth to meet the increased needs for that baby calf.
So, in the end, a producer needs to commit to a regular assessment of body condition score for several weeks, if not months, and stay right on top of that, if not every other day, every day.
Well, and that's right, Eric, but I also recommend that producers get a fresh set of eyes, neighbors that are candid with you, maybe family members that are visiting over the holidays to ask them to take a look at those cows and just give you a candid thought on how they look. You look at them every day when you're in the drudge of getting stuff done. You need to get fresh eyes so you can get a candid assessment on where they're at. Your local veterinarian, your district, your county extension agent, I think anybody be willing to give a look at and evaluate where things are standing. And it's important now because at calving, the body condition of that cow, you're setting the stage for the next production year, not only in the early health, the scours, the diarrhea, everything that can happen to those babies if they don't get proper nutrition in utero, that will manifest itself. And we don't know today how severe and how extensive a winter we're going to experience, Eric.
Dale, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
That from Dale Blasi, beef cattle nutritionist with K-State Research and Extension. We want to venture a tad further into this topic of managing those settled beef cows and heifers through this last stage of their pregnancy, with a little more emphasis on the actual newborn calf health implications. We'll turn to a K-State beef veterinarian for his input on that. After this break, you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today returns now, devoting the first half hour of our broadcast to early winter cow herd management, with an eye toward assuring that the calving season, occurring here in the next couple of months, goes as smoothly, as productively as possible, thanks to managing those calving cows and heifers appropriately at this point of their pregnancy. We bring in now Gregg Hanzlicek, the director of the Production Animal Field Investigations Unit with the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at K-State. He interacts with cow-calf producers on these very matters routinely. And Gregg, what we'd like you to do is lend a perspective here on assuring good calf health at calving through appropriate female nutrition management now. And how does good nutrition and adequate body condition score influence that fetal development?
That's a great question. Well, and there's lots of really good research, a lot of it done at Oklahoma State and particularly University of Nebraska that has shown that cows in that 5 to 6 condition, their peak milk production's higher, therefore weaning weights are higher. Calf health issues before weaning are less from those cows that have good body condition because their colostrum's higher quality and quantity. And then these cows that go into calving in a proper condition, their reproductive efficiency is better. They're going to cycle earlier. They're going to become pregnant earlier. Some of the most recent things is a topic called fetal programming, which, like I said, a lot of work coming out of University of Nebraska, where they showed that heifers that were born to cows that were in proper condition. So we're talking about things going on later in life. These heifers that are born, their pregnancy rates as they become pregnant as yearlings and things are higher. They're aged at puberty. They reach puberty earlier, therefore they're younger when they calve, which is a plus. And then the amount of health issues that these calves have if they're born to a cow or heifer body condition is their health issues are less. So there's lots and lots of reasons why that 5 to 6 is really important. The neat thing is that right now, driving around the state, whether cows are on stalks or still on pasture and getting supplement, I've noticed that they did very well this summer in most areas. So they are 5, 6s, maybe even a little higher. So all it takes is a way to maintain them. And for me, number one, we need to test our forages. Can do a forage analysis on a whole field of hay for $25, $26. And then from that, have somebody that knows nutrition balance a ration for those cows.
Money well spent, by the way.
Absolutely. And then it's a matter of deciding what protein supplement economically is the best way to go. And that's where I usually start. And
you have, well, a calculation, and a fairly simple one that producers can go through to compare the various costs of protein supplement sources and make a prudent decision here.
Absolutely, and I really stress that don't just look at the price per ton of whatever the product is, but for instance, if we have sometimes alfalfa hay is the cheapest protein source, and sometimes it's not. But say, for example, if we have an 18% alfalfa hay that we think looks like it's pretty inexpensive, we just take that 18 and multiply it times 2,000, which is a ton, and that gives us how many pounds of protein that are in that ton. And then whatever the price is, we take the price divided by how many pounds of protein, and that'll give us the cost of each pound of protein is. And that's the key, is to look at the cost per pound of protein, pound of energy, whatever you're looking at.
And therefore you can compare, to put it this way, apples to apples in terms of the protein availability from that supplement.
Absolutely, and that's really the only way that you can do it is, like you said, apples to apples. It's dollars per pound of protein.
Yeah. So go through that basic exercise, and you can get to that point in making that critical decision given the economics of the day in cow-calf production. Other considerations in figuring out how to balance that ration, maintain that body condition?
Yeah, so it's not only just economic, but it's the ease. I mean, this may be the cheapest way to go, but it may not be the most appropriate. But we know that typically lick tubs and lick tanks, they're going to be, per pound of protein, they're going to typically be higher because it's convenience. Right. It's like going to a convenience store for some bread versus a grocery store. You're paying a little bit more, but it's more convenient. So maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't. Waste. We've got to think about the waste. If we decided that wet distiller's grain is the best protein supplement and we're feeding it on the ground, we've got some waste in there.
And that's forage and supplement in both cases.
Absolutely.
Waste.
And the forages, if we're using round bale feeders, or people call them bale rings, some of those, because of the way that they're made, the designs, we'll lose up to 25% of the hay. It will not be consumed. It'll be used as bedding. So all of those things, not just the price of protein, but all those kind of things need to be thought about also.
The animal's willingness to consume that supplement, though, and palatability, you say, has to be considered here.
Absolutely. We might get a forage analysis back or a test back, and it looks like it's great. But if the cows can't eat it or won't eat it, it doesn't do them much good. And one of the things that's pretty common that we see is, let's say that first cutting alfalfa is really the cheapest per pound protein source out there. First cutting is usually very stemmy, and putting it in round bale feeders or just a bale and roller, the palatability is pretty low, and so those cows have a tendency not to eat as much. They really don't want to eat it. First cutting, you'd probably want to put through a bale processor to make it more palatable. Whereas if you had third or fourth cutting alfalfa, because it's fine stemmed, a lot of good leaves in there, you probably don't want to put that through a processor because it'd pulverize it and you're going to lose a lot of the protein.
You'll end up with powder, basically, which is
absolutely
hard to handle as well.
Yep, and it blows away in the wind. I mean, if you're out there and you're processing a really fine alfalfa, the protein's probably going as fertilizer and not in feed.
So give those considerations due thought as well. the frequency of supplementing. And this has been something, Gregg, that's been looked at pretty hard over the years. It gets back to the labor involved in presenting that supplement.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been some really good work at K-State that's looked at that, and the numbers are kind of all over the board, but typically we say that if it's a protein supplement and it's under 30 to 32%, you probably should feed that every day. If it's over that 30 to 32%, we say you can feed it every third day. Some people even say more or less frequent. But the thing, if you feed any of those products less frequently, we do know that the waste goes up substantially. So it's probably better, regardless of what the protein source is, that you feed it every day. But again, that comes into the convenience. You may not be able to get out there every day.
Yeah. Make it work for you, but have these things in mind because you're trying to make this as an efficient supplementation as possible. And you do want producers to focus on actual intake of that supplement and the forage for that matter as well.
Absolutely. And I probably say this too much, but I was taught in vet school, consult the cows. And as we get into cold weather, their intakes are going to go up, but their energy and protein demands are going to go way up too. And so even if we have a balanced ration, it doesn't mean that we just put the same ration out there every day. We ask ourselves, are the cows eating what we expect? If they're not, we need to get a hold of the nutritionist and say, hey, we're expecting them to eat too much. If they're eating more than we want, then we realize that there's an energy demand or some type of demand that's making them eat more, and therefore we should provide that to them.
So when you are consulting the cows, what signs, so to say, are you looking for that might lead you to make adjustments on the fly here?
It's the intake, and then I really like producers that body condition score their cows every month from now until calving, and just go out there and you just take a piece of paper and draw a line and put an X, anything above the lines in good condition, anything below the lines in poor condition, and just look at that pattern. The downside of body condition is that it changes slowly. Mm-hmm. One score is about 80, maybe 100 pounds difference, so it's subtle changes. But at least on the protein side, one thing that producers can do is just look at the manure. Be a manure connoisseur. And a normal cow patty is going to be 1 to 2 inches high. It's going to have concentric rings in it, and if it starts stacking up like dirt clods in a plowed field or whatever, that gives you a pretty good indication that we're shorting those cows on protein.
One further thought here that easily plugs in, and when we talk at calving time about issues with calving and potential anemic problems with calves, so forth, we think back at that point to what was the mineral availability to that calf, and now's the time to be considering that.
Absolutely, and that's a great point. We in the diagnostic lab at K-State, we investigate multiple weak calf syndromes, abortions that are due to vitamin A deficiencies. And, our green forages have a lot of vitamin A, but if we're feeding last year's hay or the year before's hay, a lot of that vitamin A is gone. And it's really important that we actually are feeding these cows a vitamin A diet so that they're passing it on to the calf. And protein, too. We have protein deficient investigations that we do every year. So a balanced ration, good trace mineral program with sulfates and high levels of vitamin A, D, and E is really important.
Well, in many respects, Gregg, it is crunch time for our cow-calf producers with spring-calving females to stay on top of all of these matters, for the end result will be predicated by what happens now in maintaining that body condition for those cows and heifers. And good input all. We appreciate your time. Thank you. He's Gregg Hanzlicek from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University. There again for you cow-calf producers, many things to stay on top of in assuring that your cows and heifers are in the proper condition to lead to a successful calving season here in a couple of months. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and continuing on now with today's agricultural news headlines, these courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the agricultural markets are awaiting any kind of details of actions that may take place as a result of the weekend meeting between the presidents of China and the United States. Here's a look from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
We still don't have a really clear, detailed idea of exactly what came out of the weekend meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Trump, but
just having dialogue is good. So let's celebrate that.
Undersecretary of Agriculture for Trade Ted McKinney says, yes, there was some sort of commitment by the Chinese to buy more U.S. ag products, but also
we've heard some discussion about possible tariff reduction. We'll see how that goes.
Now, that talk set ag markets soaring for a while, but McKinney says
we don't want to get too euphoric.
Because, he says, the U.S. is not likely to ease the tariff pressure on China until it makes firm commitments to do a couple of things.
Quit stealing our intellectual property and quit forcing technology transfer.
China promised to present a plan for that within 90 days.
So we'll see.
In the meantime, we await details on China's promised U.S. ag product purchases.
Let's just see the proof of those purchases, the proof of those commitments, and maybe we can have an even happier Christmas. That's my hope.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Meantime, President Trump has named U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, a China hardliner, to lead the negotiations with Beijing. This move signals that the president will pursue a tough stance in the upcoming talks. Lighthizer helped ditch potential deals with China over the past 2 years and has been pressing for more tariffs on China to build leverage. Chinese leadership wanted to deal with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who had led the initial round of talks but failed to resolve the prior disputes. Quoting here Mnuchin, we expect to make a lot of progress on trade negotiations within the first 90 days. He shared that with Fox Business earlier this week. He acknowledged that the U.S. and China will not accomplish everything in that time frame. Mnuchin said that agriculture will be first up in trade talks with China. Quoting him again, our expectation is that there will be specific deliverables and that timelines from China will be without reciprocal tariffs. He said that the president has been focused on the structural issues such as the forced transfers and the IP protections. Agriculture, liquefied natural gas, and the auto industry have been given commitments as part of the deal, according to Mnuchin, adding that there are 142 structural changes being discussed. He said it will be the structural changes that lead to U.S. companies being able to compete fairly, as he put it. The USDA has announced 6 trade missions that the agency will conduct in 2019 aimed at broadening exports of U.S. agricultural products, but the underlying signal likely that the U.S. wants to lessen its reliance on China as a market for U.S. agricultural products. While we're all worried about China and its impact on our business, I say that we probably became too dependent on one customer. Those were the words of Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue this week at an Illinois Farm Bureau event in Chicago. These trade trips will include Colombia, Kenya, Vietnam, Canada, Mexico, and the United Kingdom. The USDA picked countries that offer the best prospects for sales of U.S. farm and food products, that according to USDA Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs Ted McKinney, whom you heard from a moment ago. He led several trade delegations this year, including recent trips in South America and South Korea. China bought $19.6 billion in agricultural products in 2017, more than any country except Canada. Perdue said that McKinney is trying to develop a market that would benefit us for the long future and not to be held hostage to one major customer as we've been this year, in his words. Sales of tractors and combines are slowing, jeopardizing a recovery for agricultural machinery makers, including Deere and CNH, because farmers' incomes have been hurt by 4 years of low crop prices. Farm equipment sales began to climb earlier this year, raising hopes that some producers were replacing older machinery regardless of crop prices. Now dealers and executives are less optimistic. Deere last month said its worldwide farm equipment sales would rise just 3% 8% this fiscal year, down from 15% growth in the year that ended in October. Deere does not disclose actual sales for the U.S. and Canada, but industry analysts anticipate that sales growth in the region next year would be on par with the company's overall forecast. The USDA expects net farm income to fall 13% this year from 2017 to $65.5 billion, nearly half of the high reached 5 years ago. Industry-wide, U.S. sales of the larger tractor models slipping 8% in October from the same month a year earlier. According to the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, sales of combines fell by 7%. Now, C&H has not made a sales outlook yet for 2019. That company reported a 3.5% increase in farm equipment sales for the third quarter. That company attributed in part to higher prices meant to offset increased costs for steel stemming from the U.S. tariffs on metal imports. Both Deere and C&H are betting that producers will continue to replace older models with new machinery with lower operating costs and technology to plant and fertilize crops more precisely to increase their yields. A University of Illinois farm economist Scott Irwin said he's advising producers to spend the cash on operating expenses rather than buying equipment on a bet that the Chinese trade disputes would be resolved before next year's harvest. And for the first time since 2010, overall rural population in America increased from the previous year, according to a USDA analysis. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Are more people moving to rural America? Trends found in USDA's most recent look at rural America seem to indicate that direction.
Rural America increased its population in 2017 after 6 years of population loss.
Economic researcher John Cromarty says this increase in net migration to rural areas is fueled by factors such as declining rural unemployment, rising incomes, and lower poverty from 5 years ago.
As opposed to natural change, which is births minus deaths, net migration has been on this upturn in recent years, increasing to essentially zero in the latest year.
While rural population change via life events, births and deaths continued a downward trend of recent years.
Due to lower fertility rates, an aging population, more recently to increasing mortality rates among some age groups.
And while overall rural population increased in 2017, Cromarty says on a county-by-county basis, population change greatly varied. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Today's agricultural news headlines for you there, reminding you to listen to the podcast version of our broadcast. Go to agtoday.net or using your podcast app on your mobile device, type in the keywords Agriculture Today Kansas. You'll find the program. Tap the subscribe button. Brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device every weekday. agtoday.net, and you're tuned to the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
McIntyre Creek runs into Turtle Creek Lake, but it used to run into Big Blue River.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
The Kansas road map does not show it. A good topographic map would. But I found what I wanted to see in the book Pioneers of the Blue Stem Prairie by the Riley County Genealogical Society. It describes the counties of Clay, Gary, Marshall, Pottawatomie, Riley, Wabunsee, and Washington. What I was after was more information on McIntyre Creek, which runs through the farm from northeast to the southwest corner. It's an interesting stream which is generally dry or runs with a trickle, easy to step across. Its watershed runs back to Shannon Township and it starts in the hills close to where Pleasant Run Creek also starts. There must be a ridge at the start of the two watersheds, separating them. McIntyre Creek runs into Turtle Creek Lake, but it used to run into the Big Blue River before it was dammed. Of course, it all runs into the Kansas River. I like the name of Pleasant Run Creek, assuming that it behaves pleasantly. However, I have my doubts, seeing how McIntyre Creek has behaved the years that it has flowed while we owned the land and took care of it. Of course, the creek collects more water as it flows from the surrounding hills. It's one reason why we have good bottomland and can grow good crops and now hay. It is erosion from the hills over a long period of time that made the bottomland. But if Pleasant Run Creek has the name to be friendly, I can tell you that McIntyre Creek must take after the old Scotsman the creek is named after. I don't know the man, and I must someday read up on him so I know more. But I can tell you this, the creek has character and temperament. I've watched it flow at different times. Generally, it's easy to cross, but I've seen debris hanging in the trees, growing along the creek, up into the branches 8 to 10 feet from the bottom. I've watched big oak trees float down. I no longer lose my good soil from field erosion. The good grass I grow has stopped that. It was not so long ago that I read an article in the Manhattan Mercury of a program to encourage farmers who farmed land of which eroded soil washed into Turtle Lake, to encourage them to adapt farm practices to stop or control runoff. Apparently, Turtle Lake is filling up fast with good soil. I think much comes from Nebraska. Anyway, I've done my share in controlling soil erosion. I simply did it as I don't want to lose soil. I like to think I take care of the land. Maybe I'm not smart because certain crops would make more money than good hay, which I admit needs to be fertilized. I like to add clover, but from what I've read, that doesn't always work. I'm still thinking on that one. But coming back to McIntyre Creek, over time I've seen it behave like a snake. It wriggles itself through the farm and eats from the sides. At times it's been hungry. The old beaver dens dug along the creek banks are no help, as the creek is slowly wearing down, running deeper when water is low and old dens become visible. The old western man who hunted beaver must have loved the creek. Years ago, I have caught beavers with live traps and released them, but every now and then I see their activity with trees gnawed or dropped. I know they are engineers, but they're not helping me at all. When the creek runs 8 feet or more deep, these old dens cause the creek banks to collapse. It's not funny if a tractor or equipment wheel sinks in. I'm sure many of you remember the most recent heavy rains we had in October. I don't remember the exact date, but I know my rain gauge ran over. Some people recorded 9 or more inches. Thankfully, I had grass cover and lost no soil there. Some farming practices did absorb that rain, where other fields just washed and lost soil. We're learning, and we better learn, as I think that kind of extreme weather will raise the water level in my creeks more often. And that does worry me. There are places along the creek where trees have been undercut and they have toppled overhanging across the creek. Other places the creek is starting an oxbow. It's amazing to see what power water, moving water, has. I've brought in table-sized rocks and dumped them in one troubled crossing. But now the creek has thrown an interesting curve, literally, at me. Along the center farm road, we move truck, tractors, and farm equipment. That road runs elevated along the creek. At one place, creek and high road are very close. Sometime during the heavy rains in October, half of that road was undercut in one place and washed away. I nearly drove my truck down into the hole. It's a good 8 feet deep drop. To fix that hole will require some real thinking. Of course, it will cost money. It's big bulldozer work. Beyond the big hole I can't cross lays 25 acres of good hayland. I now can't get at. Surely that must lower the tax value of that land back to simple grassland or even waste. I asked the appraiser, but I haven't heard yet back.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. Our time's away for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.